3 signs you're saving too much for retirement.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Yeah, Brian, I'm super excited about this show because one of the things that we always talk about with folks, or at least one of the things people always think we're going to talk about, is you should be saving more money. You should be saving more money. Time to save more. Time to get serious. Time to start putting it away. Start now, start now, start now. But there is another side of that coin. There are folks who maybe need to have a recalibration about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. And that's kind of what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
There is a such thing as too much of a good thing. If I think about, look, we pick on that there are folks that they pay off their credit card debts and they go just hog wild with, now they want to pay off all their low interest debt, including their mortgages. Not necessarily the best idea. The same thing can happen with saving and investing money, where you take something that is a very positive behavior, but if you do too much, it could have some negative consequences, and we want to cover that. Plus, we want to tell you, because we're going to give you guidance on how much you should be saving and actually share the math. That's all coming up here in the next few minutes.
So before we talk about this, before we jump into like the signs, we ought to do sort of a lay of the land, sort of a state of the union of the current status of savings in America. Because would you say, Brian, off the cuff, just general question here, that by and large, most folks are saving too much for retirement?
No, I know too much. We've seen the stats. The typical American is horrible at saving and investing. You would think even through this pandemic where we've seen saving rates actually increase, because, I mean, I think a lot of it is just because of lockdowns, inability to travel, and other things that it caused people just to spend less. It's still not reaching what I would consider ideal.
Yeah, right now, if you look at U.S. personal savings rates since 2010, so this is over the last decade, which has been a good one. You know, if you think about it, there hasn't been like a ton of downturn in volatility as it relates to the financial markets. Average savings rate since 2010 is only 8.5%. That actually includes the elevated savings from the pandemic. I think if you were to drop that off, it's only a little above 7% or so for the average American.
And anybody who follows our content for any period of time, you've heard us mention quite frequently our goal for you, gross income, meaning before any deductions, we want you to saving 20 to 25% of your income. And like I said, in a little later in the show, we're actually going to share the math that goes into that, so you can go, did those guys just make that number up? We actually give you the details and show you the receipts.
So if the question is, so if we talk about 25%, Brian, would you say that there is an upper limit? Like you should not save more than this. Should you put a governor on how much you're saving? Meaning, can there actually, in fact, be too much of a good thing when it comes to savings?
Yeah, and I kind of hinted at this earlier, is that there is, I think people get so excited, especially once you start seeing indications that your money's working for you. Once your army of dollars start generating income, capital appreciation, you can get addicted to it. And it's one of those things where you're excited that you're building financial independence, but what I worry is that there's a fine line between financial mutant and then financial miser.
That's
and
right.
a miser, and that's what we're talking about today is, and this is the important of planning, knowing your why, knowing why you're saving and investing this money so that you don't miss out on life. That's the big part that I'm worried about, is somebody taking something that's such a positive activity of saving and investing and just doing too much and then having regrets later.
So as we go through these today, you ought to do a little bit of a self-assessment, because financial mutants, most often we are talking to you. These are traps that potentially you could fall into. So let's jump right into the first one. We're talking about the 3 signs that you're saving too much for retirement. Number 1 on our list is you're only living for the future.
Now, Bo, I can't take this line because, so I'm going to make you say it, because I was like, I mean, it's not a dad joke, but it is so cheesy. I mean, it is dripping with, but I wanted to make sure you got credit for this line. So go ahead and hit them with it.
Pre-show prep, and it just kind of hit my head, and I said it out loud, and I couldn't pull it back fast enough. But as we were coming up with this idea, I said, you know, today is a gift. That's why we call it the present. And then there were jeers and all kinds of stuff. From the money.
Did you make that up, or did you read that somewhere?
No, I didn't make that up. I'm sure maybe I heard that in a book somewhere, but I didn't come up with that. But we've heard it over and over and over again. There is something unique about today, about getting to be here in this present moment, that sometimes folks that are super future minded, we forget about and we ignore.
Well, and that's what I think, if the vast majority of people, and that's why there's even a group of people that have come up with a catchy thing of YOLO, you only live once. And typically, we talk about discipline. We talk about why you have to have deferred gratification, and those things are on opposite sides of the spectrum from that you only live once. But there are limits, guys. I completely worry about people understanding that abundance and having that abundant life also means you do have to create experiences. You do need to create your best life through your 20s, through your 30s, through your 40s. Because if you're doing everything for the future, you might have some regrets. And it's not only from missing out on experiences, but unfortunately, as financial advisors, Bo, we deal with clients that have done this where they've saved. You get in your 50s and 60s, have a health crisis, and then you're like, what
was
the
it
heck
all
happened?
for? Why
Yeah,
did I
and
do
so
that?
I want to make sure you keep your perspective, understand your why, and also stay very healthy so you do get abundance, you get memories, you get experiences, but you also have plenty of money for the future as well.
One thing I think that was so helpful for me, and I would encourage all of you out there who, if you are goal-oriented and you're an achiever and you're a pusher and you're someone who really wants to continue moving towards the next thing, I would really encourage you, find a mentor who's a few steps ahead of you. Find someone who's done the things that you've done, but they've did it a while ago, right? So, Brian, I want to give you a huge compliment. You have echoed this to me over and over and over throughout my career. Early on in my 20s, I said, Bo, you're in your 20s. You don't have to be so serious. Why don't you enjoy it? Why don't you, hey, Bo, you just got married. Stop trying. It's okay to, hey, you just had kids. It's okay. You keep reminding me, stop and smell the roses. Enjoy this present season. Because while it may not sound as exciting as being in your 50s or in your 60s having millions and millions of dollars, there are some sweet things right now that you can't go back to. And you just want to make sure that you're not so blinded by your goals or the achievement you want to make it to that you miss that. And so you have been just a huge voice for me, bringing me back down on that.
Well, I recognize achievers go through mental checklists where you're like, hey, I want to make $100,000 as soon as possible. I want to have $1 million by this date. I want to have $5 million by this date. I want to own a house by this date. And, so it's not uncommon that successful people, you're setting healthy goals, but you can also become so just laser focused on that issue that you become absolutely miserable to be around. You also blind yourself from experiences. And look, I want you to have that focus. I want you to be disciplined. We talk about it all the time, but make sure you know the limits, you understand the why, because there is a healthy balance there.
And another thing, Brian, there's actually a practical application or practical implication of this as well. And we see this all the time. Folks that are really great savers, but the way that they save is they max out their Roth IRA and they max out their 401k and they do that and they do that and do that. And so their retirement pot, their future money is great. But what they don't have or what they've not thought about, what they've not planned for, is what about that goals that are like 1 year away or 3 years away or 5 years away? I feel like we see that over and over.
Yeah, we call that retirement rich. And you see this especially, I feel bad for the 30-year-olds, especially. I kind of expect when you're in your 20s, there's just not a lot of money laying around.
Sure.
So it probably is going to end up with your savings goals. You even see this with the financial order of operations, that you very well in your 20s could end up with lots of 401k, Roth IRA assets. And it's just, that's good practice just to go through the financial order of operations. But there is going to come a point where you want to buy that first house, where you want to kind of start spreading your money out. And it really does typically happen in your late 20s, early 30s, sometime in there. And if you're not careful, if you get carried away with your savings and not making sure you have access to liquid assets, you can find out that things that are negative to your financial life, like car purchases, you don't have the liquidity to do them appropriately. And then I see this also all the time too, is that I have actually experienced clients that have 7-figure retirement accounts but can't pay cash for a car or can't do a home renovation or a home repair where they put a new roof on their house because all of their money is locked up into retirement accounts that are essentially put away until they reach 59 and a half to 60 years of age.
Now, I know when I was a much younger person, I say, yeah, Brian, I hear you, but man, I want to be saving. I want to get to my 25%. I want to be saving 40%. I want to do this. I want to do this. If you are a young person out there, if you're someone who is in your 20s or your 30s, or even still if you're in your 40s, one of the things to keep in mind is that if you can stay disciplined, it does not take a lot to end up with a lot. So this idea of I can't do things today, I can't go to Starbucks, I have to save every dollar, that may not be true because the longer your timeline is, the more kind the numbers are to you over the long term.
Yeah, and I want to give one piece of advice that I think, because I don't like to just poke holes in people's plans. I also want to give you corrective actions. Write down what the next 1 to 5 year big expenses are for you. And then I want you to compare what your saving strategy with the financial order of operations are and see how that all fits in together. And as long as you can check the box and go, okay, I've got the house down payment covered, I've got that next car, I've got all that type of stuff covered, you're going to be okay. So write down the 1 to 5 year goals, make sure they fit into your retirement saving strategy, and you'll be okay.
So if you're new to the show or perhaps you've not seen this before, let us show you just how powerful your dollars can be given a long enough timeline. So if we want to talk about how much would be required for you to become a millionaire by the time that you get to age 65. And what we're going to assume is that as you age, your risk tolerance decreases, so your rate of return increases. So we'd assume a 20-year-old can make a 10% rate of return, and then a 21-year-old can make a 9.9, and then 9.8, and 9.7, 9, all the way down until you get out to age 65. How much would you have to save every month in order to be a millionaire by the time you get to 65? Well, what's really, really exciting is if you are someone, maybe you're in college or just got out of college, and you're listening to this show, it only takes you $95 a month to get to millionaire status by the time that you retire.
That's so exciting.
If you wait until 25, it still only takes about $158 a month. I'd argue that's very, very doable. If you wait until 30 and you start at zero and you want to be a millionaire by 65, you've got to save about $270 per month to do that. At 40, the number goes to $780 a month. And then if you wait till 50 to get started, right? If you wait all the way until you get out to age 50, say, you know what? Oh man, I've not been paying attention. Now is the time I've got to start. It does become a lot harder. Now you've got to start saving $2,500 a month if you want to get to millionaire status by the time you get to 65. But I actually think that's kind of encouraging, Brian, because one of the things that happens as you get into your 40s and into your 50s, it's likely you're getting into your higher earning years, right? You have more ability to save. Maybe some of those messy middle 30 things have fallen off. What I think is really incredible is every $2,500 per month that you can save starting at 50 will be another $1 million in your retirement portfolio. That is just how powerful your army of dollar bills can be for you.
We typically use this chart to motivate because I want everybody to know every dollar when you're 20 years of age has potential to turn into 88. Every dollar when you're 30 years of age has the chance to turn into $23. So that's very motivating. But there can be, and I said this earlier, too much of a good thing. I want you to look at this, change your perspective a little bit, is that I want you to know, yes, this is motivating to know every dollar is so powerful, but it also should be freeing to you to know, hey, it's okay because a little goes a long way. The goal is not to be a 20-year-old who saves all the way to 65, spending as little as possible to save as much as possible so then you can live a horrible, restrictive life in that 45-year period, but then party it up once you're 65 or greater, because you might find that each decade of your life had a special sweetness, had a special thing that makes it so good to enjoy, that you need to find that balance. So don't let this motivate you to the negative. Use this as a tool to know what you need. This is why we talk about planning is so important in the process, so that you can know what's just enough, and so that you get into that Goldilocks situation. That's what I want, is I want you to get more than enough, but not so much that you've missed out on so much of life.
Now, again, one of the beautiful things, if you don't have a chance to hang out with us live, we record these shows live, and there's a chat going right now. And one of the people said, no, you can't save too much for retirement, Brian. If you just save too much early, you can just retire earlier. You can just remember, these are signs that perhaps you have an issue. And one of the signs is you're only living for the future. So even if you are a FIRE person, right? Even if you are someone who wants to retire really, really early in your 40s, I would make the argument you can still accomplish that goal without sacrificing everything now, because you only get to be in your 20s one time.
Yeah.
You only get to be in your 30s one time. So make sure you're just doing an assessment to make sure you understand why you're making the decisions that you are making.
Yep. So that leads to, because you can never say too much might be a little strong in the fact that number 2 is your relationships are struggling.
Yeah, this one I think is sad. I mean, it's obviously sad when someone isn't living for the present and they look back with regret. But this one I feel like makes me really, really sad because we see this happen so often in our country and in the folks that we interact with and people we hear about that talk to us about their finances. It's a big deal.
Yeah, and don't take our word for it. I mean, the research shows that the biggest issue a lot of families deal with when you're talking about spouses is just the financial decision making. You know, and you can see right here on the screen, we have 36% of married Americans say money causes the most stress in their relationship.
And so, and again, that's so sad because I think about when it comes to like personal finance and cohesion, I get excited thinking about how that works inside of a marriage or inside of a family. Because remember, ultimately, money is just a tool to allow you to do the things that you want to be able to do. And so what's so great is when you have spouses come together, say, hey, what do we want to do? What are our goals? We want to be able to send our kids to college. And we want to be able to retire at this age. We want to go on this trip. We want to travel. It should be something that gets excited, that brings the family together. But unfortunately, that's not the case. It often is something that divides and causes issues inside of the family.
Let me give an experience share for how this manifests when we talk about you could be saving too much, could be impacting your relationship. Because a lot of you guys are like, look, if you're a hyper saver, if you're a financial mutant, you're actually going to have more assets, so probably fighting is going to be less. This should be a positive thing. That's true, but let me give you the negative side, is that I actually had someone I know who approached me because they obviously know we're in money all the time, and they said, look, my spouse is considering leaving me. And I said, well, what's going on? He goes, she said one of the primary reasons that is just irks her and has turned into a major issue is I still have her give me receipts.
And what's the like socioeconomic? I mean, is this a couple that's doing okay?
Yeah, doing fine. But I think, like I said, financial mutants, and we'll typically we sometimes we can get too carried away with too much of a good thing. So the things that realize when you're in your 20s and 30s and you're trying to get to building the healthy habit of saving and investing, it probably does make sense that you're doing traditional budgeting where you're watching every dollar that comes into the financial household and you're making sure it fits into your plan. But there will come a point, and I talk about this, is that you graduate from budgeting to more of a cash management plan where I'm hoping that more of your money is just automatic for the people, and the fact that you've got your saving strategy automated, you've got all the money going into the right buckets at the right time so that you don't have to ask your spouse or loved ones to give you every single receipt, because what was great in your 20s to create a healthy habit might turn into that pet peeve that actually separates a relationship because you're trying to make sure you're not getting too many lattes. You're making sure they're not spending too much when they go to the convenience store and fill up the gas tank and then pick up a bag of combos. I mean, this is the type of stuff. It's that little teeny tiny stuff that can fracture a relationship. And that breaks my heart because money can be a positive tool if you know what its why is, but don't let the good habits of budgeting turn into a dark thing that actually divides the relationship.
Yeah, I'll share sort of a personal experience that I learned this firsthand, and it's something that I've had to like practice to get better at. When I bought my very first house, I bought it super, super young, and I was super tight, and I was focused on saving and not other things. And so when I bought that house, I went to Home Depot, and I bought the $8 paper blinds. You know the ones I'm talking about where you put the adhesive up, and it's just like an accordion of like tissue paper that comes down. My wife and I, we got married, and that was our house that we ended up living in. And she was like, hey, are we going to do so? I was like, no, we're not going to do those blinds work perfect. Why would we change this? So we kind of progressed in our marriage, and we ended up moving from Georgia up here to Nashville, and we were looking for houses and stuff. And she said, hey, I want to have a conversation. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. She goes, I really want us to buy a house, and I'm really excited about us talking about starting a family and doing all these things. But you recognize, like, one of the things that's important for me is when we buy a house, I really care about it feeling like a home. So if we're going to, like, do this, are you going to be okay if I want to buy blinds and I want to do window treatments. I was like, blinds? I can go get you everything for $40 so we can have all the windows covered. I had to realize that her goals and what she found fulfillment in were different than mine, and that was okay. I was not going to force her to conform to what I thought was right, because I thought window treatments were a waste of money or whatever it was I thought.
I'm
at that
finding
time.
myself being highly entertained here because I'm thinking about, because I know your wife, and I know, now what's funny is you're bougie now, but back then you
But back
probably
then I
were
was
more
not
of a
bougie.
Spartan, and then I get a visual of, how when you go to like Mexico or some other places, the furniture will actually be poured into, it's like concrete, like bed frames, concrete couches. I have a visual of you with your paper blinds, and when they're building the house, just be like, hey, can we just go ahead and just pour
make some
chairs
chairs for me.
there? Let's make this.
I love it.
But it is one of those things where that is a solid experience share, because I do think your life evolves, and it's important to understand, because communication, we all know, anybody who's been married for an extended period of time, or have a significant other, because there are people who comment all the time saying, don't get married, it's horrible. And I'm like, there was obviously, you need
Something
good
happened
communication. You need to understand, because I think marriage is outstanding as long as everything is lined up and it's working out appropriately. Now, look, I know there's outside stuff that happens, but make sure it's not you tracking receipts or doing something that's a positive thing initially that turns in and manifests into something completely negative. Pay attention to that stuff.
Now, marriages aren't the only type of, we've talked a lot about the marriage. That's not the only type of relationship that can struggle. If you're too focused on saving for the future, saving for retirement, you kind of fall into that miserly, I'm going to argue that it can affect your friendships in a pretty big way.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I'm not talking, I understand when you're in your 20s, we're all broke.
Yep.
I mean, most of us are broke. So it is like that Friends episode where you go out to eat and you order the bisque, like some tomato, soup, and you're like, whew, okay, man, my dinner should only be $12. But then you've got your buddy, or you're going to a nice restaurant.
That's a nice restaurant.
That's what I'm thinking about. Is that I remember when I was in my 20s, you go to a nice restaurant, and you're like, I'm going to trim this thing down. Maybe I do a soup, maybe I do a salad, and then you pregame or do whatever because you can't afford drinks but you have a buddy who's doing the appetizer, they're doing the surf and turf, they're like bottle for the table. I get when you're in your 20s. That you might, on ticket splitting especially, that's going to be tough.
Wait, how will this be? And you're like, we want this on 13 separate tickets.
But I will tell you, as you get older, and I think this is interesting how it transitions, there will come a point where as you start having success, that you become more, I feel like it just happens naturally. You become more generous where you will buy a round of drinks for your friends. Or maybe instead of y'all worried about who ordered what, y'all just split the ticket evenly. And I'm saying there that you have to know where that level is. But my point and my advice for this show on saving too much is don't be the miserly friend that everybody knows is super tight and saving, but you never buy that round of drink for your friends. Not because you're worried about paying your mortgage or your rent, but because you're just tight.
That's right.
Because I think that can have an impact on relationships. Be healthy about it, but just make sure you're checking yourself to make sure, hey, am I treating others like I want to be treated? Because I got to tell you, the older and more successful I get, that whole adage of it's better to give than to receive. There's something about abundance in the fact that you being able to do things for others that I think can be even more powerful as long as you've checked the boxes on all your financial order of operations. Who cares if you're spending a little bit extra to do something for someone?
And look, again, this is sort of a personal experience share. Early on in my 20s, I was known as the tight one. Like I was known in my group as, Bo, he's so tight, squeaks when he walks. And I didn't love, I didn't like people thinking of me of that. Now, I was making wise decisions, that sort of thing. I kind of like now that it has changed a little bit. They know that, hey, if we go, okay, yeah, Bo he'll probably pick up a round of drinks or, or even if, because, I'm a water drinker, right? Like I just struggle with like ordering sodas or whatever when I go to restaurants. Even if our meals are equally yoked, we go with another couple, I'll just say, hey, let's just split down the middle. And that's okay now. I like that I've been able to transform into that instead of still being tightwad Bo that my friends remember from my early 20s.
I do have one exception that I still, tightwad ways have not gone away from me.
Uh-oh.
I don't mind splitting tickets evenly when I go out to eat with other couples, but there's one thing. I don't even care if you order the nice meal, but the fancy bottles of wine.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my
Yep,
goodness.
yep.
Especially because if you're not drinking the wine, you're like,
What? I didn't order that. I don't want to do that.
that's the only exception to this. So if we all go out to eat, now I'm probably going to have everybody order like the crazy expensive bottle of wine because they know that this it still kind of gets to me.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it bothers me a little bit.
All right, so number one was you're only living for the future. That's one sign. The second sign was that your relationships are struggling. Here's a third sign that perhaps you're saving too much for retirement and you should reevaluate. And it's that the lines between needs and wants become blurred and you have difficulty defining those two camps.
Yeah, I mean, in traditional America where we're not good at saving money, it's not uncommon that you'll see people, they don't save and invest because they're wasting their money on having the nicest iPhone. They're wasting their money by buying the fanciest car that they can afford the car payment, not thinking about there's a balance sheet component, meaning the debt and the depreciation that's going on with that vehicle. I get that. But what we're talking about here is that there's some individuals that get so excited about saving and investing the money that it's not that they're taking and going and consuming the resources. It's that they're avoiding things that as you go through life, you need to be checking the box on to make sure that you're safe, healthy, and things are going well in all aspects of your life. That whole 360 view gets excluded by certain individuals. And Bo, give them some examples of what we're talking about.
Yeah, like I see this all the time, especially with folks in the messy middle, right? Because they're so focused on building, so focused on saving. I'm like, oh, great. Hey, do you have any life insurance? I'm like, oh, life insurance? I'm not going to die. I'm in my 30s. Why would I spend that money when I go invest? I'm like, no, that's something you need to have. Or I say, hey, congratulations on the new baby. Have y'all had a conversation about like getting your estate documents done? And estate documents, that's for like my grandparents. I'm like, no, that's for you. And they're like, well, how much does it cost? I'm like, well, it's going to cost a couple hundred, maybe a couple $1,000s, depending on your circumstance. And I'm like, oh, no way. Why would I ever? And I'm like, guys, just because it costs money and there's not an immediate ROI on those dollars, it's something that you absolutely must do. But I see people that get so tight and so focused, they can't pull back from that. And they can't not do those things that they absolutely should be doing. They don't recognize that those types of things, life insurance or estate documents, those are no longer like wants, discretionary decisions. I would argue that for the sake of your family, those have now moved into the need category. Those are things that you should have in place to make sure that you protect your loved ones.
You talked about life insurance. You talked about estate documents. You need those things. I'll say it's also about like health insurance.
Oh yeah,
Fortunately, we are large enough. We have health insurance here at the firm. But I have had, and I've seen cases where people who are so excited to be funding their Roth IRA, but to the detriment of having health insurance, any type of health insurance, that scares me because I'm like, man, that is because when I talk about the financial order of operations, one of the reasons I tell you need to have an emergency reserves for step 4 or deductibles covered in step 1 is you're trying to keep your financial life out of the ditch.
Yep.
You're trying to make sure a thing that was unaccounted for, or an accident, or something breaks down, doesn't put you in a situation that you have to make tragic, horrible, desperate decisions. I worry about that for people who are thinking, hey, I'll save by not having any health insurance. I'm in my 20s and 30s. What do I need health insurance for? And then that being the thing that derails your financial life. It gets scary to me.
I'm gonna give another sort of personal experience share here. I don't know why I'm so self-deprecating today, but you'll like this one, Brian. I figured out a hack when I was a young man before I got married, is that Publix used to sell buy one, get one boxes of cereal, right? So every Sunday night, before the week started, I would go to Publix. I'd go buy like 16 boxes of cereal, right? I'd only pay for 8 of them.
Is it really 16 boxes?
There was like 16
What
boxes.
is the most boxes of cereal you think you bought at one time?
It had to be somewhere in the high teens to 20. Yeah, because I just load up and put them so what I would do is I would eat that for every meal. I'd have breakfast and at night, and I was like, this is incredible. I'm grocery shopping for like $20 a month, right, or whatever the number was. Well, then we got married, and I was like, sweetheart, have I got a deal for you? Look, I figured out how we can save so much money. And she said, hey, you realize, like, just because you're buying, like, Honey Nut Cheerios and the commercial says that it's like a heart healthy thing, that's probably not healthy. That's probably not good for, like, your long term. And I was like, oh, yeah, you know what? Maybe that's right. At that stage in life, it was no longer, it now became a need that, hey, maybe I should start focusing on eating a little bit healthier and not just focusing on consuming whatever the cheapest food I could put into my body. I think that's something that matters and something that, again, you have to kind of assess, am I making a long-term bad decision for a short-term savings win?
Yeah, I mean, because your case was cereal. I know people, and look, I've been guilty of this too. The dollar menu at fast food restaurants. Yep. Yes, that's cheap. You couldn't go make food for yourself for $2 but that's not healthy in the long term, and it will catch up with you. That's what I think. Once anybody who kind of realizes they want to focus on their health, they want to focus on the long term with what they put in their body, because it is important. Mm-hmm. You find out eating healthy is expensive. And that's why, so make sure you understand what the cost of doing things appropriately is a need more than an excess thing, just so you can make sure you max out your Roth. That's something to pay attention. And then I'll kind of close it out with something that always surprises me is people who are willing to, now look, if you repair cars on the weekend and you're great and and if a car breaks down on the side of the road on your way to work, you just whip out a thumbtack or a paper clip and you go and repair
it all together
right there. More power to you. But I think there's a lot of folks out there who, you're not as handy. I'm one of them. I'll raise my hand, but I've got to have a vehicle to get me to work every day.
Yep.
Don't put your job in jeopardy. Don't put your spouse and the children in a car that's not safe to drive across state lines just so you can save a few bucks. Look, cars are horrible to your financial life, but there is a balance between jalopy that's going to break down and potentially cost me my job and saving for the future safely with a car that gets me to work every day. Think about those things.
And I would argue that as you age and as your life circumstances change, the difference in needs and wants change. I would argue that once you have a family, the type of vehicle you drive and the reliability of the vehicle and the safety of the vehicle becomes much more of a need than perhaps it was when you were in your early 20s. You have to make sure you do a self-assessment, because sometimes your needs have to mature just like you have to mature.
Well, I don't want to, this is going to go beyond needs. This is more of the cynical view of once you reach a level of success. I think we talk about this for retirees all the time. It is hard to go from saver, builder of wealth to now consumer of wealth. And look, being a financial advisor, coming from a public accounting background, I'm always amazed at how many people who create legacy wealth and still live a very miserly life, even into retirement. And I always try to give them a little perspective, because look, there's a balance here. Once again, everything is about the balance. But I have seen experiences where you see the family that created a business, created multi-generational wealth, and they're still living so tight. Meanwhile, the kids and grandkids are sitting in first class.
They got no problem.
And this is y'all know the stats. I give it all the time. To have a stat like first generation wealth, meaning having $1 million or greater, typically 80% are first generation creating that. The only way you can have that stat is that by second generation, 70% have squandered it. By third generation, that number is 90%, meaning we've replenished, we've gone ahead and pushed this through. So question yourself, once you've reached a level of success that you're no longer stressing the system, because ask yourself, should I do this? Because your kids will have no problem spending your money. I've had clients come to me where they have a farm or they have land and maybe they have geese or other things, and they're like, yeah, I mean, my leg's starting to hurt. And I'm like, maybe I should buy a gator, but I just don't want to spend the money. I'm like, go buy the gator. Go buy the tractor. Go buy what makes your life easier, because your kids will have no problem spending that money. Your grandkids won't. You might as well figure out what's the balance, what's the utility of making sure what you've created is actually getting used appropriately.
All right, Brian. So one of the things that we always say on the show, one of the things we always talk about is that when it comes to saving, when it comes to building, when it comes to how much you should do, our goal for you is always to save 25%. And a lot of people ask us, hey, How'd you guys come up with that? Why is that a thing you said? So we want to answer the question, why do we suggest you should save 25%? And if you do that, what does that end up looking like for you later in life?
Well, I mean, and look, this comes from several different things, but we're going to actually show you the receipts, give you the math in a minute. But if you remember forever, I mean, if you go read books like The Wealthy Barber and so forth, they'll talk about, hey, if you can save 10%, you're going to be all right. Just make sure you're saving for 10%. But realize a lot of these books that were written in the 80s, 90s, that book was specifically written in the 90s. Back then, pensions were a little more
common.
Everything.
Right.
I mean, you had a lot of companies that had pensions, Social Security, the safety net was much more stable. So it was one of those things. Probably if you were saving 10%, it's because your employer, plus you were taking some out of your paycheck, going into a pension, you were going to be fine. We all know that stuff's not around anymore. Now we have more of Roth IRAs, 401ks, 403bs. The responsibility falls on your shoulder. So instead of saving 10% is enough, you've got to think about what can I save that actually carries the full weight to make sure I'm okay. And the more money you make, the more responsibility falls on you. So we know it's greater than 10%. We decided, let's figure out if there's a mathematical way to figure out, since we know it's going to fall on our shoulders, with how much people should be saving.
So let's look at the numbers, right? So here's sort of the math behind the 25%. And here's what we assumed. And we did this with very conservative assumptions. We said, let's assume that on your investment assets, you can have a 6% annual rate of return. Really, really conservative rate of return. And let's assume that wherever you are, your wages will increase from where they are today about 1.5% per year. And when you retire at age 65, your goal is to replace 80% of your pre-retirement income. So I'm going to walk that through again. You make X dollars today, and X dollars are going to grow by a 1.5% every year until you get to retirement. And then when you retire, what you want to accomplish is you want to be able to replace 80% of your pre-retirement income. So income goes up, you want to replace 80% of that. Well, here's what we found. If you're someone who starts saving at 20, and that is your goal for an 80% income replacement by 65, you actually only have to save 12%.
Yep.
You'll have to save 12% to get there. However, if you will take our advice, if you will become a financial mutant early on, and you can save 25% starting at age 20, by the time you get to 65, when you retire, you can actually count on, assuming a 4% withdrawal rate, 167% of your pre-retirement income. You can retire and get a pay raise. Yeah. Now, what most often happens is most folks don't do that. What this means is that if you can figure it out at 20, odds are you won't have to work all the way until 65. You're going to have some option sooner. So then if we say, okay, well, what happens if the number is 25? If you're starting at 0 at 25, now instead of only having to save 12%, you got to save 15% for an 80% replacement ratio. But again, if you can save that 25% starting at 25 all the way till 65, you'd be able to replace 131% of your pre-retirement income. At 30, and this is what I think happens for the average person, they don't take it incredibly serious in their 20s and then their 30s happen. At 30, if all your goal is to replace 80% of your pre-retirement income, you have to be saving 20%. You don't have a lot of wiggle, a lot of margin. But if you can save 25%, there's a chance that when you retire at 65, your retirement income will match what your pre-retirement income was. You can replace 100% of it. If you wait till 35, you got to save 26% over the 25% number to replace 80. If all you save is 25%, you're going to be right there at that 80%. And then if you wait till 40 to figure this out, you got to make up for lost time. That's when you have to say, okay, you know what? Maybe I wasn't doing it, but now I got to get serious. This is where my savings rate does have to get really, really aggressive. That if I want to replace 80% of my pre-retirement income and I'm starting at 0 at 40, I got to have a 34% savings rate.
Mm-hmm. And look, you can see if you only save 25%, it only gets you close to 60% of your living expenses. And here's the thing, guys. I know most people in their 20s, you're fighting for every dollar. And it's easy to have that envy monster, that green with envy, where you look at people who are older, who have more, and you're like, man, I don't make enough. I don't have enough going on to get it. This is why I love showing data like this, is because I get it. We all, when we're in our early 20s, don't have a lot of money, but look at how powerful every dollar in your army of dollar bills is. It's okay if you're saving 15% while you're in your 20s. It's going to work out. But if you can somehow start, maybe when you come out of college at 22, 23 years of age, maybe you start at 10%. But then, every time you get a pay raise, you're putting at least half of that pay raise towards the future with the goal that by the time you leave the decade of your 20s, you're in that 25% of gross income. Guys, it's going to be incredible. And here's what so that just shows the opportunity and how powerful each dollar is. But I'll go a step further. By looking at this chart and looking at the data that Bo just rolled out, you're good in your 30s. I mean, this is one of those things, even if you goofed off in your 20s and you just had the realization, you just found the Money Guy show in your 30s, it still works.
Yep.
You can do this by saving and still having a great retirement. 40s doesn't mean it's in no man's land or anymore. It just means you're going to have to get to work. You're going to have to pull up the socks a little bit higher and know that this is going to be harder, but you can do it. All this is very important to keep motivated, understand the why, and then create a balance, a plan that actually reflects your life.
Now, you have to find the balance, right? So a lot of folks may be looking and say, oh, great, I can do 25%. I'm just going to wait till I'm 35. I'm just from 20 to 35, I'm going to spend like a banshee, and then I'll get serious about it because I've still got enough time to make it up. Well, none of us know what life is going to throw at us.
Yeah.
We don't know how life circumstances are going to change, how our job is going to change, what the economy is going to do. So if you can figure this out early, what you're really doing is you're providing your future self with options. But, and the point of this whole show is, you have to find that balance. You don't want to be saving everything in your 20s and not living at all and enjoying the present. You don't want to be so tight and so miserly that you find that your relationships are struggling and the people you care about become less important than that future goal or that financial thing you're trying to achieve you care about. And you don't want to miss track of, okay, am I really covering all of my needs? Or am I misappropriating and thinking that something I actually need is a want and I'm not doing it because I'm so focused on saving? A true financial mutant understands where that Goldilocks middle ground is.
Yeah, and that's what I do want to make sure we don't lose the point that maybe you just goof off until your 30s. That's not success
That's
either.
not it.
I
That's
want
not
you
it.
saving even in your 20s, because if you get ahead of the game, what it does is it creates that margin when you're buying the first house. So, it gives you mentioned it. It gives you flexibility. It gives you margin. It also, now I think a lot of you are probably watching this, you're financial mutants, and you're like, I think I'm going to be in a really good place. What does this mean for me? Because I'm kind of self-reflecting after watching this show. Maybe you do get time. That's what financial independence is supposed to allow you to have options. And one of the most valuable resources in the world, you can't buy it, is time. So if you are ahead of the curve, maybe you can retire sooner. Maybe you love doing what you're doing. You don't want to retire sooner. Maybe that allows you to start thinking about legacy goals, charitable giving, paying for kids, grandchildren's education. There's all kind of things you can do with that margin. I'm just going to echo Bo and say, create a plan, and it's going to be custom. You're going to need, if you've reached that level of success where you're wondering, have I saved too much? Am I on track? Have I saved too little? This is when it probably does make sense to bring in a co-pilot. If you are so successful that you're second guessing, how do you manage this money? Or do I have too much? Do I have too little? That's when we love the abundance cycle, because I give you tons of free advice. We load you up so you can learn, apply, grow. But there is a moment, a crossroads, where we're hoping that you're so successful that you do need a co-pilot. You need that personal CFO interaction that we can do as fee-only financial advisors.
And look, guys, we love that we get to do this. And Brian and I have been talking a lot about this lately. And I don't know why this has been on our minds, but we've decided we just want to change the whole financial world.
Yep.
We want to make sure that we are adding as much value to your lives as we possibly can. So if you've not had a chance to go out to the website, moneyguy.com. Go check out our resource page. We have tons of free resources out there available for you now, and we have a lot in the works. We've got some exciting stuff that we're working on that we hope will be of value for you. If you are on any sort of social media, whether it's TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, make sure you go follow us there because we're trying to put nuggets of useful and valuable information out there. Because at the end of the day, what we ultimately want to do here is make sure that we are adding value to your financial lives. Because if we can get enough people to make better financial decisions, to start at home, it will be amazing the impact that can have. And we're going to be right here with you on that journey. Thank you so much for letting us be on this journey with you.
I'm your host, Brian Preston, Mr. Bo Hansen. Money Guy team, out.